What's up, great people, and welcome to another episode of the Fave Effect Podcast. I'm your host, your boy Fave, and I am joined today by one of my favorite people. I'm always excited to have conversations with this man, not only because he is just a great leader in Christ, but he's also a great friend of mine, a great confidant. I can go on and on about, what he has done in my life. I think there are people that God places in your life on purpose, and he's one of those people that I hope is in my life for a lifetime. He is the senior pastor of New Morning Light Missionary Baptist Church. He is an amazing preacher, pastor, counselor, and he's just an amazing man. And he's also a fellow alum of the illustrious Parkland University. And I don't have anything else to say. He's also a great man of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Alpha Phi chapter. So, without further ado, I introduce to some and present to others, Pastor Reverend Charles Spencer Hamilton. I just gave all his government out. But Charles, I'm so glad to have you with me today.
I'm always just be Charles when it come to you, man. All that pastor stuff, it just go out the window. When somebody know you from way back, it don't feel right. It don't feel the same.
I know, but I want to honor you in that way because even though in Christ we're so humble to be called to do ministry, you still should be honored and you still should be reverenced in the fact that it's not easy being a pastor of a church. No, it's not easy. And speaking of church, this week's topic, you all, is one that's going to hit home for many people out there because we just endured a global pandemic, and some of us are still recovering. And one place in particular that's recovering is the church. And some may say it may never recover. Some may say, we never skipped a beat in my church. But whatever the case may be, Bedside Baptist has increased in membership over the last 3 years. And so the topic this week is the church still necessary? Is the church still necessary? Like you already know, I don't have guests or I don't interview people. We have conversations. I have guest hosts. So Charles and I are going to tackle this topic. We both are ministers. We've both been preaching the word of God at least 5 years. But both of us is probably more than that. And we both are millennials. Right. And so we both view Christianity and view Christ in our own way. And that's what I love about having conversations with him, because although I'm older, a lot of times when we get to talking, it may seem like Charles is older because I feel like I'm aging backwards. I'm kind of like Benjamin Button. But I want to really get into this topic, Charles. And first, I can start off with just the question at hand. Is church still necessary? Is it still relevant in today's time? Is it something that we look forward to on Sundays or Saturdays for those who are Seventh-day Adventists? Or is it just like, damn if I do, damn if I don't?
Well, to start off, church is always going to be relevant.
Okay.
Always. Now, to get into the nuances of that statement is the traditional church still relevant, right? Because the church, as you've seen and as we've witnessed, must evolve with the people and with the times. A very difficult aspect of church these days is people are still trying to fit a traditional model in a New Age church. And so the problem becomes when tradition bumps up against reality and what the people actually need. And now it's a new generation of unchurched people who weren't raised in the church. Their parents were raised in the church, but grandma was raised in the church. And so you have a group that's very far removed from tradition, you see. And so that is what kind of gives the feeling of maybe it's not relevant anymore. But the church is always relevant in the hearts and minds of the people because the church is what establishes that spiritual foundation, right? That, being a pastor, I'm always stay in that vein. Now I know we're gonna go back and forth about different aspects of that, but foundation.
I'm being patient. I'm letting you get it out. Let you see what you feel.
Foundationally, the church is always necessary. However, the methods in which we do church must change to meet the times. There's a hymn, I like my hymns. I got it tatted on the back of my arm. It says, "A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify." And in the line of that, it says, "To serve this present age, my calling to fulfill. And with it all my powers engaged, I'll do my master's will." And so therefore, serving this present age may not look like the traditional model, may not look like grandma's church, may not look like grandpa's church. It may not be as many hymns. It may be a couple more lights and smokes. I'm not a big fan of the lights and the smoke and all. And the stage, these days churches don't even look like a church. It looks like a concert. But the building isn't what makes the church.
Okay.
Right? Even the pomp and circumstance and tradition isn't what makes the church. The people make the church, and the worship and adoration to God.
And so I'm glad you said that, because that's where I was going with how people view the church I think is what's causing the question to be so relevant, because people are viewing the church in a way that this building I have to go to, it's almost like a chore. And I think that's what has happened. I think, like you said, it's like a generation unchurched people, but even if they were brought to church, even if they're in this generation that's coming up now in their youth, them being brought to church was more so a struggle. It wasn't like I want to go. And we all had those moments we didn't want to go. Right. But at some point it became like, okay, this is something, I believe too, I want to go to church. But I feel like now the generation is, prove it. They're like, okay, so go to church and do what after that? And believe in Christ, and so then do what? And it's almost like if you don't have answers for them immediately, right, they're disengaged. And so, and I work so closely with Generation Z people, right, and I'm always, Christ is always in me, and the church is always in me, and that's kind of my point of view. Not saying that the four-wall church isn't necessary, but I think the four walls is not the only version of a church anymore. Right. And I think that you having followers, or because you mentioned earlier before we started recording, you were talking about being under shepherd, being under a shepherd, and I think people view pastorship differently now too. Mm-hmm. Not saying the pastors view it differently, but those people, they make like, I know who is that? My pastor, I used to be under Dream Center, William Murphy, and I still go, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm under the church. But when I was heavily going about 3 years ago, he mentioned that there's somebody who goes to church who don't necessarily come to church. Right. They send their tithes in a brown paper bag, and they call him when they need counsel on the phone. And that doesn't mean they're unchurched, because they're not coming to the four walls. Right. And I'm not saying, because I know where you go next with this too. I'm not giving nobody an excuse, right, to live in the gray. Right. But if people are living in the gray, right, we still show them grace and, right, meet them where they are. Not saying that I don't know if you eventually start coming to church full time or nothing, but I know that you can't turn those folks away or look at it like, oh, they're not doing church how church is supposed to be done, because in the Bible, when it speaks of church, it speaks of church in different formats. It's not always the four walls, or yes, it talks about the church, but it didn't always talk about the church being us, and the church being inside. So I guess my belief is the church is always necessary. I think that church is always necessary. To someone, church is necessary. Right. However, I think we do have to open up our lens to, we're still responsible for bringing people to Christ, whether that's to a four-wall building or to a relationship with Christ. Right. We're still responsible for that. And so I think that is more important to me than ensuring that somebody is in a church. Right. If that makes sense. And I don't want people to think that I'm, oh, you're a minister and you're telling people not to go to church. I'm not telling people not to go to church. I'm telling people, don't let your not going to church keep you from Christ. Okay.
But, well, there's a lot of angles to that. First, with the needing to come into the building. These days, there's this aspect of virtual pastors, right? That churches hire, because the large portion of the congregation may never step into the building, because they may be reaching out to people that are in the Midwest, up north, in the South, and they're reaching a large group of people that never come into the building, but are still active members and a part of the ministry, send their money, tune into the virtual Bible studies, all those things. And that has been something that the current church has to contend with. How do you engage those members? And churches hire virtual pastors, and that's a form of church. And when we look at the biblical form of church, they had synagogues and they had all the different aspects of worship as it pertained to Jewish tradition. But Jesus's ministry was out in the wild, right? He was doing church out in the public, walking amongst the people, living the ministry, right? And so there's the argument for that as well. But in this current age, I see there's a major necessity for people to have some sense of structure and order. Because the sad part is people like to use the excuse of, well, I don't want to go to church, or I don't have to go to church, to then do whatever they want to do on Sunday and not give God reverence or respect or any time. Like their time that they're quote unquote doing church is a quick read of maybe a little devotional real quick and listening to some gospel music, right? But that's not going to realistically give you the substance you need. If your influence in your life is 24/7, what you watching on TV, what you watching on social media, you going out turning up in the club, you doing this with your friends, doing that. You have all these external factors that are vying for your attention, that are pulling your attention, and that take so much of your time, and then you give God maybe 5-10 minutes, and that's enough for your spirit. How you gonna do God like that?
But see,
you know what I'm saying?
but that goes to show that I feel like sometimes the view of giving God time is connected to church. Like that's the time. That's the only time to give God time. When I meditate daily, I have my moments with God daily, or even more, sometimes more than once a day. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's where the relationship come into play in, and I feel like sometimes you can get, for lack of better words, caught up in church so much that you're not really necessarily developing a relationship with Christ. You're just developing a routine.
Okay.
I go to church, so I did. Like you said, I know people that leave church, go to brunch immediately after church, hookah immediately after church.
Right.
So it's like a lot of times they're going just to say they went.
Right.
So it's a routine. But when they in a crisis or needing Christ, they're not even able to fall on their knees because they just used to, I'm gonna talk to God Sunday.
But watch this. They exclude church, but when it's time to actually have a relationship with God or pray, they don't know how to pray. When it comes down to where do I turn to in the Bible, they don't know where to turn to in the Bible. Because now you made church this, well, I don't have to do that. I don't have to be like those people. I'm going to do my own thing. But when it comes down to you, pull up something in Scripture using the Bible, not no app, using the Bible to go to something that's going to encourage you.
And see, and I think even something like that is a prime example. If they can't, is that wrong? And I think sometimes people feel that church I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Sometimes people feel like they don't even qualify to be in church. That they don't fit the description, or they don't fit the layout, or because church can be a lot. And I'm not speaking from a person. This is not coming from a person, you all, that I grew up in the church. Church is I love church. I'm a church today church. Mm-hmm. However, I'm also it's seeing what young people are not doing, and they're not going to church. And so, and I'm not trying to like force you like, oh, you need to get up and go to church. You need to get up and go to church, because I feel like the relationship is so important that I would rather you feel motivated to go to church because you feel like you need to grow in Christ and you feel like you need that connection, not because Fabe said go. Yeah. Because grandma said go. Right. Mama said go. Yeah. And why ain't I still going no more? So it's like, so we can force it, but I'd rather force you finding that relationship with Christ, force you to have those moments of silence where you figure out what is your connection to Christ, what is your purpose, why are you here,
and that's why you need the guide. Because
you need a guy.
How you going to?
Why is church the guy?
Because when you leave it up to the individual, you figure out how to have a relationship with God. What is that realistically?
You're right, and that's why I say I'm not saying figure it out. I'm saying I would help you in that, and but not force you to say let's go here, and that's what's gonna make you do it. Now I'm gonna invite you there because I'm going.
So maybe we need to define what church is and what it isn't, right? So church, historically, and even from the biblical standpoint, it's supposed to be an aspect of community, right? It's supposed to be where community is formed. That's where the hymn comes in. What a fellowship, what a joy divine. And so the fellowship of church brings this aspect of community, which helps people feel whole. So you're not only just going to church for the word, but also to see your family, see your friends, be connected to something, and be unified by traditional beliefs and values. And so what church did, and this is why a lot of people, like, especially when they have families, they look for a church because church helps build that family unit, right? It also helps instill values in your children, right? It also helps create some aspect of order and bring some semblance to our week. Okay, church on Sunday is not something the family can do, and we can learn and do this together and grow in our spiritual walk and journey. You see now what church begins to cultivate and look like. And so I would agree that now the church needs to meet the needs of the people today, because, like I said, we have about 2 generations that are removed from the church, that don't like traditional church, but need something. That's why you see there's a rise in anxiety, there's a rise in depression, there's a rise in isolation and loneliness, and the church used to speak to these things.
It used to be the place that people go to get their healing, but now they don't. You said the church is a place of fellowship. You quoted leaning on the everlasting arm.
Right.
But do you believe in this statement? Is the church, because some people define, I was watching a podcast earlier, he defined the church as a hospital for the sick. And so do you believe in that statement?
I believe it is. Because we all sick in some aspect.
Yeah, so you said that, but then you also defined it as a fellowship for believers. So how do I guess you can say this, because we all sick in some way, but there are people in church that after they've been in church for a while, they feel like they're healed. And so how do you make a place for the healed and the sick? Or not even necessarily healed, because we all still sick. But you know those church members that feel like they've created this routine, and I'm going to heaven if ain't nobody else going. And now instead of them helping someone else get healed, it changes from Christ-like to like, I know better than you, so let me teach you how you're supposed to live.
Well, there's certain aspects of church that you'll never get away from because people are there, and people gonna bring their issues and bring all the little tit for tat stuff that comes with it. You won't be able to get rid of that. That's a personality.
And so, do you think that that's why a lot of these last 2 generations you spoke of? Do you think that that's why a lot of them are like, no, because I don't even deal with that in my life. I'm not going to go to church until
which is not fair because people do deal with it.
But when I say deal with it, if it approaches them, they like, I'm not gonna let you judge me. I'm not gonna, this is a generation of very much so like, this is how I want to do it, and this is how I'm going to do it.
And that's what the issue is with church, because the current generation rebels against order, structure, tradition, and church symbolizes all of those things. So if you come to it with the mindset of, I don't want to feel controlled, I don't want to feel like I got to submit to something, I don't want to feel like I have to show deference and all of this and that, I want to be able to come and do what I want to do and feel good and be happy and do it on my own terms. Church isn't about that, because church is a place where you come and find a relationship with God through understanding you have to submit to God, right? And submission and discipline speaks to the fact that some stuff not going to feel good. Some stuff you're going to have to let go of. Some people you'll have to let go of. There's going to require a sacrifice of you. And so we don't like sacrifice, especially with the generation that has come up, and even my generation, we don't like that. We want to, everything's about feel good, look good, have a great time. And realistically, the church kind of speaks out against some of those things, because that's where the enemy comes in and it reels you in with what feels good, looks good, and gets you to have a good time. And so when it comes to what the church's role is, I think it's now finding a method and way to ease people, or a new era of church in where people can feel comfortable but still convicted. And that's a little bit of an oxymoron, but comfortable enough to get them in, but that's to build relationship with them to get them to the point where we can then call out and say, if you want to have a relationship with God, if you want to turn your life around, if you're tired of having the same input and getting the same results, this is what you're going to have to change about your life and about yourself.
But that goes back to like, I guess I'm in a crossroads a lot of times with with the if you want this, then you have to do this. It goes back to you're just telling me what you think you know. You know, like, or not saying, or you're just telling me based on your relationship and how you got close to Christ. And what if my journey? Well, I know what if it is. My journey is different, or my relationship is different, and I feel like we can't shun people for like stating their opinion. It's almost like what are you saying? It's almost like when you tell somebody, oh, this is just the law, this is just how it's gonna have to be. And I'm not saying, and I want you to know what I'm speaking against. I'm not speaking against the sacrifice and you have to be disciplined. I'm not speaking against it. I'm speaking against terminologies like, if you want to have if you want to have a relationship with Christ, then you need to do this.
Mm. And it is true.
What if I buy into it and I do this, and I still don't feel like I'm connected or I don't have a relationship with Christ? It's like that. I think that's where we're stuck in too. I think a lot of preachers have guaranteed this. You know, sometimes we guarantee we preach. We are preachers preaching, and they guarantee these blessings and this anointing and this prosperity and all this stuff. But somebody sitting in church who don't know nothing else, and they came to church, and that's what they hear. Right. They're like, okay, so if I want to get my rent paid, and I want to be, and I'm struggling. If I go to church and my pastor, if I pray every day this week, God gonna make a way next on Saturday. And you, what if you didn't? What if you did? What if you still don't? And then the man come back to you and say, well, I got an eviction notice Saturday because I didn't have the money. Yeah. Well, son, you know, so I'm not saying that's what you do. I'm not saying that's how you think about it. Right. But we have to be, pastors have to be okay with the tough conversations too. When somebody say, but why? Right. Or, but no, it didn't work like that for me. Mm-hmm. It's like, and that's why for me, the relationship is so important. Mm-hmm. To the point that I'm saying, yes, church can help cultivate a relationship with Christ. Mm-hmm. But even if you don't decide to go to church, I still need you to cultivate that relationship with Christ. Right. I still need you to try, and I'm here to help you whatever you need me to do. If you need me to come over, and we can go that route. Right. What I'm saying is when I think of the question, is church necessary? Is it necessary to get into heaven? I said that earlier today. Right. Is it if I don't ever go to church again, to the building church? Right. Are you saying that I will forever be lost or unchrist or not in the trajectory to going to heaven? Because let's keep it a buck. We got Google, we got YouTube University, we all are students there. We got all these different platforms that open up the spectrum of what church can be, like and how can you create church. I mean, even when I was pastoring, my short stint in pastoring, I was pastoring at my house. Right. I had one time I had a service right here. Right. And folks was out here crying and I didn't. This ain't a church to me.
But it's not about necessarily the location, but what takes place in the space. But before we get to the question about do you have to go to church to get to heaven, I gotta speak to the fact that one of the key things that we're losing sight of is the necessity for there to be some foundational principles. In everything you do in life, there are foundational principles. When you begin a job, they have orientation or whatever they call it nowadays to get you up to speed on this. If you do these basic things, you'll do well. Now, there are many ways you can do this job, but these are the fundamentals. If you play sports, you're always going to learn the fundamentals first. And if you start a new career, get a new business proposition, there are always going to be the fundamentals. Now, once you master the fundamentals, then it's good for you to add your own swag into it, add your own skill set into it. But you always need the fundamentals to turn back to. And you'll find, even if you don't have fundamentals that you're taught, you as an individual, when you're learning something, if you're trying to learn it on your own, when you begin to master it, you will realize that there are certain things that you always return to, certain patterns and traditions. And so it goes to show in learning and comprehending and gaining a good understanding or foundation in anything, you have to set some boundaries and ground rules. And what I'm saying, what church establishes for the individual is the foundation. Because if you don't have solid foundation, that means anything will come, anybody will come, any preacher, soothsayer, witch, warlock, whatever's out here, a prosperity gospel will come and tell you something. You're like, oh, that sounds good. Oh, this sounds good. And then you're jumping over here and jumping over there, trying all these different things because they sound good, but you need to get some foundational principles. And realistically, some people think they can find that on their own and do that on their own, but your knowledge is only so much if you're just learning it for the first time. You need to talk to people that have studied it for years, know a lot of historical background, know a lot of different things and different ways and obstacles that they face, that you may face, to help you come up with an understanding of how to govern yourself or how to build that strong relationship with God. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, and I agree on thing that I would say differently is you can get those foundational principles and not be in a church.
Well, yeah, you cannot be in a church building, but that's why I go back to it's really helpful if we define what church is. So if we just say church is the building, then that just limits it to a space. If we say church is the gathering of people, then it's about the fellowship, and you still have to get into the aspect of there's a community, there's a group of people, regardless of the space, and we're following something. We're following someone as a leader, the teacher. And so there's always going to be some kind of organizational structure that comes around it. And that's where people start beginning to have the issue. Because as soon as you get people to start gathering together, you're going to have someone that has to lead that. You're going to have to lay some ground rules that we follow. There are going to be people that disagree with the way we're going. And sometimes that causes conflict. And you're going to have who's right, who's wrong. Then politics get involved with who's in, who's out. The bigger it grows. But that's just a part of people. And so the issue that most people have is just the fellowship that arises out of the institution of church, which can vary from group to group. Because black church looks different from white church, right? So you can see in a black church tradition, it's not the same as a white church tradition. It's very different principles. So then you see church may look different from that. You can see William Murphy's church looks very different from Senator Warnock's church at Ebenezer, which then also looks different from, let's say, House of Hope. And so there's so many different styles and different ways in which people are doing church. So you have to find something that meets you where you are, that you can kind of come in and feel comfortable, right? See me, I couldn't jump right into William Murphy's church because I grew up in a traditional Baptist church. So I would need to get in something that still has some of that.
But I did too. I grew up in a traditional Baptist church too, but I can leap into William Murphy church.
I can't.
I can leap into Impact. I can leap into but I also I like the traditional church to a certain degree as well.
Right.
My next question is, and we both can answer this, but I just want to hear what your immediate response is. Is Christianity a cult?
No.
Why not? When we define what cult is.
Okay, define it.
Well, let's you know what? Yeah, we're gonna go to my friend Google. My good friend Google.
And let's get several definitions from the Google guy. Right.
So the first one said, a system of religious venerations and devotions directed toward a particular figure or object. A relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. That's the second definition. And then the third one says a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. But the first one says a system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object.
And so what separates cult from religion is where the worship is going.
But does it separate it? Because the definition says it's religious.
No, that's not the part that brings the contention. It's the person. It didn't say deity. So if you look at the definition
for a particular figure or object.
Object, which is not a deity, right?
No, it's not.
Now you can deem it as such, but what makes it but what makes it different from religion, if you look at the definition for religion, it's going to say deity or God, right? And where cults separate is people traditionally start following and worshiping the individual of said cult.
No, because some people, the individual leads them, but they worship something else. Like they
Right.
worship space, or they worship,
Right.
you know, this not God, but it's.
But if you realize what makes it odd, or the separation from being a traditional religion, is those people may say they worship in whatever system, whatever thing they're doing, but it always is centered around one individual. And that's when it becomes cult-like. So remember Jim Jones
Mhm.
and his cult. He was professing God,
Yeah.
but he became the centerpiece of that. And then this is how, because I did watch on Netflix How to Become a Cult Leader, not because I was trying to come, but I just wanted to see
No, but
what it was, right? And so
I'm
all
not
of
there,
them,
so you know.
all of them talked about how the cult leaders always do one of two things. First, they create this scenario like it's becoming the end of the world. The end of the world is coming. Immediate destruction, apocalypse. And then that they, as the individual, are the mouthpiece of God. And they are the only way to salvation. That
So
following them,
So
you can be saved.
I'm gonna stretch you a little bit.
Okay.
So you're telling me that there aren't pastors out there that tend to come off being worshipped, although they're professing Christ and they're pushing Christ, but you know, and I'm not gonna say those names because you know I'm all for the cloth. I'm a member of the cloth myself. But let's keep it above. It's some pastors out there that if you interview their members, it can come off like they're worshiping the pastor, or he just and when he touched me and so
Yeah.
it's still, that's why I'm not saying that I think the church, I'm not saying that Christianity is a cult, but I am saying that are there similarities? Yes, very much so.
Okay, okay. You got there's some similarities,
Yes.
right? It's almost
So-
like
so
trying
to
to
that
clearly define reverence and respect and worship, right? It may be a thin line. Some people
Yeah.
may lean over to the
Because-
worship opposed to respect
Because
and reverence.
and I learned this from a very well-known, very theologian, we like to call him. You know, when you go to theology school, you're a theologian.
Right.
And I learned this from a theologian, and they told me that they learned this in theology school.
What is it?
And that pastors, in order to gain membership or gain a following, you should at some point you have to leave your members on a cliffhanger to keep them coming back for more. So it's almost like, and so I was like, what do you mean on a cliffhanger? He's like, like you don't really tell them everything. You tell them little by little because your church is a business and you need to, cultivate your membership and bring them back. And I'm like, okay. And then he said, and then we also learned that when in your teachings, you don't teach them how to necessarily get it themselves. You teach them in a format that they feel like they need to come back to you to get the rest.
And that's not of God.
And it's not of God,
That's not of
but
God.
he learned that in theology school.
And I question any theological institution.
And a very popular one, but we I'm not going to do that.
That would teach that, because Jesus didn't teach people like that.
He did.
And so if we are doing something contrary to the gospel message that Jesus Christ himself taught, that's blasphemous. Paul said in the book of Galatians, let any man be accursed that preaches a different gospel. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking, if you're not preaching Christ crucified and living an example through the word in your daily life and also through teaching it, you're teaching your own doctrine. That's a doctrine of self, right? Where you're now putting you're now putting yourself in the place of God and of Jesus by saying you have to come to me to understand salvation. That I can't teach you to learn it on your own.
So you're a theologian. You went to theology school.
Yeah.
So when I speak of in that realm of learning, I guess how to cultivate your membership.
Right.
Was any of that true?
I wasn't taught any of that.
So what were you taught? Just a small sort of what were you taught when it came to church membership and the business of church?
So there in seminary there are certain classes that you can take that focus on that. I didn't take those type classes.
Yeah, because he said it was a class that it was
Yeah.
like really centered around.
Yeah, I didn't take that because that wasn't I didn't go to seminary for that. I went to seminary to learn the inner workings of the Bible and to get a different perspective of God Himself. And so I'm focused on Old Testament, New Testament, Hebrew, Greek. I'm focused on the marginalized population, learning homiletics, learning soteriology, learning about the eschaton and the end times, and learning about all kind of just biblical concepts in the text to get a better understanding of how to preach the word in a way that's just not surface level, but understand it from the context in which the people that were living in that time understood the word itself, So I'm preaching truth. You see what I'm saying? And so for me, that was not a concern. And hey, maybe that's what's getting people to turn to Christ now. But I wrote a paper my first year in seminary called Pocket Jesus, and how people like to put Jesus in their pocket and carry him around and pull him out
when they need him.
And when pull him out when they need him, and also pimp Jesus out, right? To make money off of him, to exploit him, to use him to dangle in front of people like, this is salvation, this is how you get there, but you need to come through me and my way of thinking to get there. And I'm not going to exploit people like that,
Like you say, you're not, but
well, of course,
in the world we live in, is there more use or is there more
opposite? There's a lot of money
opposites?
to be made off religion. I mean, that's because now, and I think it's harder now because a lot of people don't care whether they go into heaven or hell. They saying, I got one life to live, I'm gonna live it up. Right, but now, or in previous times, people were able to use the fear of heaven and hell, of I gotta get to heaven, or I don't want to go to hell.
I don't go to hell, yeah.
So I'm going to pay my tithes. I'm going to give this. I'm going to do it. If you've been to my church, you notice I do tithes and offering very different. I come out of 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 9, where it talks about each of you should decide how much to give within your heart. Then it goes into saying the Lord loves a cheerful giver. But most pastors jump straight to the Lord loves a cheerful giver and skip over. It says you should decide how much to give within your heart, right? And so I preach that because I had a member come up to me and say, Pastor, I just want to talk to you. I know I haven't been able to give, any tithes and offering, but I hope you would still speak to me. And I'm like, look, my relationship with you and me pastoring you isn't contingent upon how much money you give on Sunday. I say it's got to be more than that. And so I wanted to liberate the thinking of my congregation through also showing them passages of scripture that talk about giving from your heart, not necessarily just giving all the money you have, or even giving 10%. It's still good to give that. I'm not talking against that, but it says you can give from your heart and still be just as substantial in what you're giving to God. And that may not be 10%. You may just be giving all you got at that time, But pastors do like to use that to manipulate people with money. Let me see your giving statements, brother.
I was in church that was like that.
Yeah,
and certain families got treated a certain way.
Right. Or they listed in the bulletin how much each family gave.
And certain families even had places they sat.
Right. This your pew.
Yeah, they was able to sit in a certain place in church because of their giving status.
Right.
So, and I think that's what a lot of people honestly, if we just church hurt is real.
Yeah.
And as we draw to a close, and I don't want people to think like, oh, faith, I ain't no faith, just really against church. I'm not. I'm cultivating the conversation because I'm bringing up things that I've been addressed with when talking to people about Christ, talking to people about church and things like that. Because I think that my ultimate goal as a believer and as a called minister is always to draw people close to Christ by any means necessary. So I'm not afraid to go where they are and knock at the door of, I know you like doing this, doing this, and I'm not here to judge you about it. I got my vices too. We all have something, but to go throughout this life without Christ is it's already hard, and we were never promised. This is not the promised land.
Right.
When people keep forgetting that we were condemned here. This is not where we were supposed to be.
Right.
So this is not heaven.
Right.
So stop thinking heavenly things are going to transpire here.
Or stop thinking that God is trying, that your blessing is for God to make heaven on earth.
Yes, yeah. So well, it's a good way.
Because Jeremiah, we love quoting the scripture that says,
for I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you, give you hope for a better future, right? That prosper piece. And we have turned prosper into prosperity, like money, riches, wealth.
Yeah.
But watch this, in the original form of what the word prosper is, in the original Hebrew, is peace.
I heard a pastor recently say, side note, I don't know who y'all God is, but my God want me to be rich. So I'm gonna be rich. And I said, hey man,
Jesus wasn't even rich.
And
that was God's
I want to
son.
be rich too, but
Right.
I don't know if I would have presented it in that
Right.
way. But I think that, like you said,
Right.
those are some of the preachers that are trying to keep up with the times and
That's what pulls people in.
get your bag.
Right.
God wants you to have a bag. God wants you to have a bag. And I'm not saying God is not blessing.
Right.
And blessing money is not necessary.
Right.
But we can't teach money in a sense of I have to have it, because then it becomes the root.
Right.
And what is the money?
The root of all evil.
Yeah.
Now,
So
but I really want people to get this when it says in Jeremiah 29, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, and give you hope for a better future." That word prosper means peace. And so for you to be in a state of peace doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a whole bunch of money.
Mm-hmm.
But that means God's going to give you enough to be at a place where you can be sustained.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be all right. And the difficult part is we're living in a capitalistic society.
Definitely.
Right. Where everything is glorified bigger, more. You need more money. You need to have bigger house, a nicer car. You need to have more materialistic things. And those things are the things that influences you and pushes you and makes you think like you don't have enough, right? But you are enough. You do have enough, and God will give you all you need. And sometimes we need to check the desires of our heart, because they exceed the reality of what God is going to do for you, right? Everybody's not going to be rich. Everybody's not going to have a 6-figure job which will allow them to fly all over the country and all of that. Sometimes it's okay to just have a regular house, just have the person that loves you, you know what I mean, and just have a car that gets you from point A to point B that won't break down, and that you can be thankful for that. And that God is still working in the midst of you not having a Lamborghini, a Range Rover, a BMW and all that you still riding in your Kia, your Honda, whatever. God's still faithful with it, right? Because you have all you need. It may not be in abundance, but it is enough for you to have your daily bread.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that a lot of those things, going back to my point about why this topic, because a lot of those things are what people are facing and what they think church is. So it's like where I think the challenge, and this is what I want to leave them with, and I want you to speak on before we log off for the day, is what do you say to that believer who's just not into church and they're saying like I can find Christ somewhere else, I choose to do it differently. What do you say to them? To, I guess you say, not necessarily judge them or put them on you need church, and that's what I think that needs to change is pastors have to come from a different angle in terms of what are you asking people to do, or what are you asking people? Why is a question that people have, and I feel like it's not wrong for them to have that question.
It's not wrong.
And you can't be offended by the question and try to throw the Bible at them, because I think you lose them even more then.
Right.
So what do you say as a believer, as a pastor who has a church, and who deals with people weekly, daily almost, in terms of someone's looking at you for guidance?
Right.
What do you say to that person, that Gen Zer who's like, I've never been into church. I really ain't. I was watching TikTok today, and TikTok, y'all, it's addictive, so pray for me. But I was watching TikTok today, and one of the girls, she said, I was going through my sexuality. I was trying to figure out, who I was, and somebody told me to talk to the man in the sky, whoever that is, and I was just like, and she was talking very, very assured, like, and then she said something else about, grew up in the church. She grew up in the church. She loved church, all this stuff, but she refers to the God, or referred to men in the sky. But I think she was being sarcastic with like how people say, beyond the world in the sky, he lives above. And I think she said, and so I think she was trying to get people to understand it in a more like, I have no relationship with Christ. I don't feel like I'm going to hell. God he loves me just like He loves you. But what do you say to that believer who's like, you know what? I just don't think me coming to church, listening to a man sitting in the pulpit, tell me how to get from Christ or believe in Christ or preach me a sermon is my way of learning.
And so I would have a conversation with that individual where I would need to get more information about what is the real root of the issue. Is it the setup of church and the fact that I got to sit here and listen to this person, and your issue is who is this person to tell me, you know, all of these different things with my relationship with God as individual. And then, you know, like ask some of those questions, because a lot of it is the person has an issue with the setup and structure.
The usher, when you walk in the door, somebody tell
right,
you like where you need to sit.
Right, and all of it, and they're like, who is this person? What is, you know, people have an issue with that, and that's not God. That's institutionalized. That's the building. That's our pomp and circumstance. That's all of those things. But when it comes to God, I'm going to get to the root of, well, are you happy? Are you at peace? Doing things your own way? Do you feel like you have it all figured out? And if not, I have a way I'll show you. And the way that I'll show you is through Jesus Christ, that gives the principles of love, starting with self-love and the love of Christ. Mm-hmm. Then with respect for others and elders. So that means regardless of sexuality, if you know how to respect yourself and respect others, it changes that whole conversation of, well, this person and that person is wrong and this is right and they go into hell. Let me show you some respect first. If I can love myself in the midst of figuring out my sexuality and what all that stands for and go to God to get answers for these things, it's not about the institution in the building. It's about this vertical relationship, so that I can now make sure everything horizontal, that was across there, y'all caught that, it works out. You see what I'm saying? And so you begin to realize that religion is so individual, it's so individualistic that people get caught up on the wrong things. Right? And so my conversation with them and my reminder to them is the scripture that says, greater is He that is in me, that He is God, than he that is in the world. And if I can tap into that God that is within me, right? If you can tap into that God that is within you, then you'll realize you're unstoppable. You'll realize there's something that can pull you up when you're down. You'll realize there's something that can remind you of the greatness that's in you. Mm-hmm. I went to Clark Atlanta University and they talked about the spirit of greatness. And since I'm a Baptist minister, I'm going to assert that spirit of greatness is God Himself that reminds me that He created me to be great. Mm-hmm. That He knew me before I was in my mother's womb and made me fearfully and wonderfully made in my identity in Him. And so therefore, any obstacle that I face, I know that I can overcome it. Because the same God that was with David that helped him fight Goliath is the same God that'll help me fight my giants. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we use the biblical stories as guidance to bring us through, to help us and encourage, you know. And so when we look at these issues that people have with depression, with anxiety and all that, of course you're going to be depressed and have anxiety because you're trying to figure it out on your own. Right? You ain't got no community you relying on. You don't have people you can really trust. It's just all on you. But what God represents is that you're not alone. It says in Joshua, He will never leave you nor forsake you. He's with you from beginning to end. And when you have that and you believe that in your heart, mind, and soul, it helps pull you through those dark areas, dark times. Right? And that's the vein that I would begin to talk to somebody through when it comes to God and our relationship. That forget the church. Let me show you how to make this Bible work for you.
You know, right? I think that's where we are. I think that's where people are. It's not necessarily saying, I don't want to go here because this, that, and third. I think it's saying, I need to know how to deal with my demons when I'm not here. Mm-hmm. And because most of the time I'm not here. And so I think that ultimately we want to bring people to Christ. We want you all to understand that Christ is necessary. If the church ain't necessary, Christ is. Mm-hmm. You don't want to live through this. I always remember this quote. Since I was a young boy, I heard it, and I always said, I would rather live on this earth, believe that there is a Christ, or there is a God, and to die to find that there isn't, than to live on this earth, believing that there isn't a God, and to die to find that there is. So I don't want people to ever think that we're demeaning the church and saying the church is not necessary. But what I wanted to bring this topic was to allow people who have these questions to understand that a lot of times it's not the pastor. It's not the. It's the way he said the format of what traditional church is that has pushed people away. And so now, and this is a charge to pastors out there in the churches. Now it's the church responsibility, and so now we put it back on the church. The church has to stand back up and redefine what it looks like to be in church, and also be open to what it looks like to have people who are not traditionally from church or know what church is, and not just have them, not just come on in, baby, and then expect them to be in a certain place by a certain time, or they need to be gone.
And dress a certain
But to have a place that says, if they not where I am, who say where you are is amazing, but if they not where I am, that doesn't mean anything, because the church is a hospital, and a church is a place where sick people go, not necessarily sick in health, but sick in anything that's taking over your life or taking over your mind, and they need help and assistance. They need to be around people that will help them figure out how to get out of that thing. And that's, I think, where the church is losing people at, is because people don't start to let the pomp and circumstance define what church is.
Yeah.
So now the church is, and the challenge is on the church.
It is.
The church has to step out of the box of, this is a fellowship for the believers, and step into this is an emergency, first of all. And we need to get as many unbelievers, people that don't believe in Christ, to Christ by any means necessary as soon as possible, because we don't know the day or the hour. And I think if we put it in the mindset of an emergency, and not just say, oh, this is what my church, I love my church family, this is what we do, I need you to go and strategize at all times of how we bring in more people who are not, and bringing Christ to the people, to their homes, wherever we got to go, to the skating ring, to the, wherever it is, the local college, the local elementary. Churches have to step outside the four walls and believe enough in the Christ within them to take church and to take God to the people.
And I think that's what we will need to really get back to, having small groups in the house. That isn't a full church service, but that's how Paul built all these churches. And for those of you all that, when you're in the New Testament, you're looking at all the names like Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philemon, these are places Paul, the Apostle Paul, started churches, and he started them in folks' houses. He didn't start them in church buildings. And out of that grew the community. And we'll probably need to get back to the grassroots of church, which means it won't be a bunch of lights, cameras, action, praise and worship. It'll just be conversations like what we're having.
And if that works for you, let it work for you, but make sure it's working for you.
Right.
And it's not entertaining you.
Right.
That's a whole other subject. That's a whole other, I don't even want to get into it, because that's a whole other thing. Is church just entertainment? But
that's the next one.
That's the next one.
Episode 2.
But I want to thank you so much, Charles, for always, every time I call, it's never a question if or can I, it's always win. So I appreciate you for coming on. I appreciate you, all the listeners out there who tuned into this episode, because it's a topic that many people are talking about or not talking about. And like I said, Bedside Baptist membership is at an all-time high.
Folks still sleep.
Folks still sleep. Sunday is actually the day of rest.
Right.
They rested from when it starts until it ends. But get out there. I do challenge everyone to get out there and seek Christ. And if you find a group of people that you feel like it fits you, go for it. But seek Christ regardless. Seek a relationship with Christ. Seek guidance. Seek help. Look for mentors and pastors. Every pastor, like you said, you don't necessarily have to come to the church first. He's gonna start off with talking to you about how are you living, what do you want to change about your life, and then eventually church, bringing you to the church will be his goal. But you cannot. We cannot, as church members and people that are church goers, shun people for saying, I don't get it. What do you mean you don't get it? I'm not here to judge you for not getting. I'm here to help you understand. Right. And if I can help you understand, the least I can do is offer Christ and offer that relationship with you. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Faith Effect. Tune in next Thursday at 9 p.m. Until next time, remember, the best leader works to make even better leaders. God bless.